I'm Eleanor Kingsley, a 70-year-old widow living in the quiet edges of Boise, Idaho, a place where the air smells like pine, and the silence can feel both comforting and heavy, depending on the day. I spent 40 years building my organic farming supply chain company from nothing, literally nothing. There were times when I carried crates myself, loaded trucks, and slept in barns because paying for a motel felt like a luxury. My late husband, Daniel, believed in the dream, but died before he could see how big it became. After decades of sweat and storms, the company sold for nearly $500 million, a number I still sometimes say out loud just to see if it sounds real. My life was supposed to be simple after that. Gardening in the mornings, warm tea in the evenings, and visits from my 2 children, Marissa and Grant. But peace rarely lasts where money exists. I had no idea that the greatest betrayal of my life would come not from a stranger, not from a business partner, not from a thief in the night, but from my own son. It all began with subtle little cracks in the normal rhythm of things. People assume betrayal arrives explosively, with shouting and slammed doors. But mine entered quietly, almost politely. Grant's visits became strangely frequent. He began lingering around my office, asking about documents he had never shown interest in. Every time he asked, "Mom, where do you keep your old business transfer files and those sale agreements?" His tone sounded harmless, almost helpful. But there was a sharpness in his curiosity, something cold hiding behind the warmth. Meanwhile, Marissa remained her calm, steady self, never prying, never pushing, always offering help only when asked. But even she began to sense that something was shifting in Grant. It was during this calm before the storm period that I realized something was wrong. A realization that felt like a small stone dropping into a deep well. My heart told me to prepare, though I didn't yet know for what. $500 million is a fortune, yes. But to me, it was the compressed weight of every sacrifice I had ever made. And the idea that anyone, especially my own child, might be circling it with the wrong intentions was a thought too painful to entertain. Yet something inside whispered, "Be alert." At 70, I had learned that intuition is simply the voice of every wound you've ever survived. I never imagined that these small oddities, these gentle shifts, were the beginning of a storm Grant thought he could control. He had no idea his mother wasn't just an elderly woman living in a quiet Idaho home. He forgot I was the same woman who built an entire empire with my bare hands. And long before he ever tried to take my fortune, I had already decided something. I would never go down quietly. My family dynamic was always complex. A stitched-together quilt of warm memories, deep scars, and the unspoken tensions that gather in the corners of any household. Marissa, my 35-year-old daughter, inherited my steadiness, the calm backbone that keeps a family upright even through storms. She never cared about money, status, or the shiny distractions the world throws at you. She cared about people. She visited me often, bringing homemade soup, asking about my health, or simply sitting beside me while I read. She didn't need anything from me beyond time. That's what love feels like when it's real. It doesn't demand access. It offers presence. Grant, my 32-year-old son, was the opposite. Charming, bright, and full of charisma that could light up a room, he always wanted more. When he was young, that hunger made him ambitious. He dreamed of a big life, fast cars, penthouses, everything glittering. But as he grew older, that hunger twisted into entitlement, as if life owed him luxuries he hadn't earned. He bounced between jobs, relationships, investments, each one ending in flames. I always supported him, maybe too much. Maybe I gave him so many safety nets that he never learned how to balance on his own. Still, I loved them both fiercely. Families aren't symmetrical. You don't love each child equally in the same way. You love them differently, according to who they are and what they need. But Grant began to change after he'd learned the exact value of my sale. $500 million wasn't just a number to him. It was an obsession. He would casually joke about the future and, when we all have a more comfortable life, as if my money was already in his pocket. Marissa would glance at me quietly whenever he did this, concern stitching itself across her face, but she never confronted him. She didn't want conflict. One afternoon, they both visited for lunch, something that rarely happened. Watching them sit at the same table felt strange, like seeing two worlds accidentally collide. Marissa helped me arrange the food, while Grant walked around the dining room, glancing at my framed business photos like they were keys to a vault. The way his eyes lingered on the photo of me at my first warehouse unsettled me deeply. During lunch, I noticed Marissa watching Grant with a painful kind of caution, as if she already knew something she wasn't ready to tell me. Grant, meanwhile, was unusually attentive. Too attentive. He asked questions about my estate plan, about whether my house was fully paid off, about the trust I had set up years ago. These were not the questions a son asks out of concern. They were the questions a man asks when he's measuring his chances. That day, when the dishes were cleared and the house quieted again, I felt the smallest shift inside me, a door creaking open somewhere in the dark, a realization, a warning. Something in my family had begun to unravel, and even though I didn't want to face it yet, I knew the unraveling would lead straight to the truth I feared most. The first real suspicion arrived in the form of a single conversation, dropped casually, but hitting me like a blow to the chest. It was an early evening in late summer, the kind where the sky turns soft gold and the shadows stretch long across the yard. I was in the living room sorting old letters when Grant arrived unexpectedly. Normally, he texted before showing up, but lately he came and went as if he owned the place. He dropped himself onto the couch, scrolling through his phone with that restless energy he always carried. "Mom," he said suddenly, "do you remember where you keep the old sale documents? The ones from when you finalized the exit deal?" My hands froze mid-motion. He wasn't asking out of nostalgia. He wasn't asking because he wanted to celebrate my success. His voice had that calculated tone, gentle on the surface, transactional underneath. I asked him why he needed them. He shrugged in a way that felt rehearsed. "Just prepared." "In case something happens," was a phrase that chilled me. Daniel used to say it when we talked about emergencies, but hearing it from my son, under these circumstances, felt ominous. Later that week, a bank representative called to confirm a request for access, trying to understand everything better. You know, in case something happens, important to be to my old business accounts. I hadn't made any such request. My first instinct was confusion, but my second instinct, the survival instinct I earned through decades of business wars, told me something was wrong. Very wrong. I hung up the phone with a tightening in my chest. My mind began piecing together every strange moment. Grant hovering around my office, the questions about my estate, the sudden urgency in his tone, even the way he had started complimenting me more often, as if softening me up. But the clearest confirmation came the following morning, when my neighbor, Mrs. Harlow, mentioned she saw Grant talking to a financial lawyer outside my house a week earlier. "Your son looked serious," she said. "He kept pointing toward your window." That was the moment when suspicion solidified into fear. My heart sank like a stone dropped into dark water. I spent the next hour walking through the house, touching the walls, the photos, the memories, all the things I built and protected. I had always believed that my children would inherit these things because of love, not manipulation. But now it felt like Grant was stepping into a role I didn't recognize. A predator wearing my son's face. That night, I barely slept. Every creak in the house made me wonder if he had already found a way into my accounts, my files, my future. Betrayal doesn't begin with the final blow. It begins with a subtle shift, a crack in trust, a whisper that becomes a roar. I could feel the crack spreading, and deep inside, a truth I didn't want to admit began to surface. My own son might be planning to take everything I had spent a lifetime building. The moment the red flag turned undeniable came on a quiet Thursday afternoon. I had stepped into the hallway to grab a sweater when I heard Grant's voice coming from the back porch. He was on the phone, speaking in a hushed but urgent tone, the kind I used to hear from warehouse managers when shipments were delayed. Except this time, the urgency wasn't about business. It was about me. I hadn't intended to eavesdrop, but when I heard him say my name, my feet rooted to the floor. "She just needs to sign one more document," he said, his voice clipped, sharp. "Once she does, everything transfers. I told you, we're almost there." My blood ran cold. There was a pause, and I heard him laugh, a low, confident laugh that felt nothing like the boy I raised. "No, she won't suspect a thing. She trusts me. She thinks I'm helping her organize paperwork. Just have the final draft ready." I stood frozen, the sweater hanging loosely in my hand. My breath caught somewhere between my chest and throat. I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. When he ended the call and walked back inside, he jumped slightly, seeing me there. "Mom," he said, his smile too quick, too practiced. "Didn't hear you come out." I nodded slowly, studying his face, the confidence, the smooth expression, the eyes that no longer looked boyish but calculating. He walked past me toward the kitchen, humming casually, as if he hadn't just confirmed the darkest fear a mother could have. That night I sat alone on my porch, replaying every moment of the last few months. The pieces clicked together like a cruel puzzle. His sudden interest in my estate, the strange bank call, his secret meetings, his new mentor, and now his plan, clear as day, hinging on my signature. It wasn't just greed. It was strategy, planned, rehearsed, intentional. I realized something painful but necessary. Grant didn't simply want access. He wanted control. Control over everything, even while I was still alive. For the first time in my life, I looked at my son and felt fear instead of love. I felt a shattering inside me, like glass breaking quietly in a dark room. And beyond that shattering, something stronger stirred, a memory of the woman I used to be, the fighter, the builder, the woman who negotiated with men twice her size and walked out with deals they never saw coming. Grant thought I was a frail old woman who would sign anything he put in front of me. He had forgotten the truth. I didn't build a $500 million empire by being naive. And if he was preparing for war, he had no idea what I was capable of. The confirmation of his betrayal came like a final blow, unexpected, sharp, and devastating. It wasn't something I discovered on my own. It came from Marissa, my quiet, observant daughter, who had been watching everything with growing alarm. She arrived one evening with a seriousness I rarely saw in her. She sat on the edge of the couch, hands trembling slightly as she held her mug of tea. "Mom," she whispered, "I need to tell you something, and it's going to hurt." A mother always knows when pain is coming. My heartbeat slowed, bracing for impact. She took a breath. "Grant has been meeting someone, a man named Victor Hale. He calls himself a financial strategist, but he's really a manipulator, a scammer. He tells wealthy heirs how to gain early access to family fortunes. I heard Grant talking to him outside a cafe last week. My eyes burned with tears I didn't want to shed. "What did he say?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay steady. Marissa swallowed. "He said he's tired of waiting for his turn. He said he deserves more than what you give him, and Victor told him he could help take control while you're still alive. I pressed a hand to my chest. I felt something collapse inside me, softly, silently, like a bridge giving way. There is a very specific pain that comes when your child betrays you. It's not like heartbreak from a partner. It's deeper, older, planted somewhere in your bones. It feels like grief mixed with disbelief, like losing someone who is still standing right in front of you. Marissa put a comforting hand on mine. Mom, I didn't want to tell you, but he's getting more aggressive. He's planning something with that man. I nodded slowly, my body numb. The truth hit so hard I couldn't breathe for a moment. Grant wasn't confused. He wasn't misguided. He wasn't simply making poor choices. He had a plan, and that plan required betraying me. I walked to my bedroom that night like a ghost in my own home. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection. I looked like a woman carrying the weight of an entire lifetime of sacrifices, only to realize the person she carried them for was now sharpening a knife behind her back. I cried, quietly, not loudly, not dramatically, just a slow, steady stream that wouldn't stop. I cried for the little boy who used to take my hand while crossing the street, for the teenager who gifted me a handmade card on Mother's Day, for the man he could have become, but didn't. When the tears finally dried, what remained was something harder, sharper, cleaner. Clarity. Grant thought he had cornered me, but he had forgotten that I was not a helpless 70-year-old. I was a woman who had risen from nothing and built an empire, and if he wanted a battle, I would give him one. The morning after Marissa told me the truth, I woke with a kind of stillness inside me, a silence that didn't feel like defeat, but preparation. It reminded me of my old business days, those hours before a high-stakes negotiation, when you went over every angle, every risk, every possible move your opponent might make. Except this time, the opponent was my own child, and the stakes were not just money. They were dignity, survival, and the last fragments of trust. I made myself a cup of strong black tea and sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the rose bushes Daniel and I planted decades ago. Life gives you warnings, sometimes gentle, sometimes brutal. This was both. As I sat there, I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who handled crises without shaking. I realized something important. I had been letting my age soften me, letting motherhood blind me, letting grief weaken me. But beneath all that, I was still Eleanor Kingsley, a strategist, a fighter, a woman who built success from dust. And if Grant was planning to take everything in the shadows, then I would face him in the light. I began with small steps. I called my attorney, Harold Brooks, a man I trusted more than most relatives. His voice tightened as I explained what was happening. Eleanor, he said, you must secure your estate immediately. If what you're saying is true, we need to get ahead of him. Today. That word, today, ignited something fierce inside me. I agreed to meet him the next morning. Next, I checked every document in my filing cabinet. I scanned through old agreements, wills, account records, things I hadn't touched in years. I found nothing missing, but the mere fact that Grant had tried to get into my accounts meant he was already too close. I placed everything in a locked safe, secured it, and moved the key to a place no one would think to look. The entire time, I kept imagining Grant's voice on the phone. She won't suspect a thing. By afternoon, the ache in my chest had transformed into determination. I walked the perimeter of my house, checking doors, windows, locks, things I never used to worry about. Trust was gone now, replaced by caution. Even the floorboards seemed to echo differently, as if the house itself knew what was coming. That evening, Marissa returned with groceries and a worried look in her eyes. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. I placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'm more than okay," I said. "I'm ready." She studied me for a moment, and I could see the recognition in her eyes, the realization that I wasn't going to break. I was going to fight. But the hardest part wasn't the legal planning or the strategic thinking. It was the emotional shift. Accepting that my son had crossed a line he could never uncross. Love doesn't disappear overnight, but it changes shape, becomes something brittle and painful. I still loved the child he once was, but I could no longer trust the man he had become. As the sun set over Idaho, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple, one thing became clear. Grant believed he had caught me in a moment of weakness, but what he didn't know was that he had just awoken the strongest version of me, the version I hadn't needed in years. And I was ready to protect everything I had. The next morning, I dressed in a crisp navy blouse and my old business slacks, the ones I hadn't worn in years, but still made me feel grounded, sharp, unbreakable. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw hints of the woman I used to be, the one who negotiated million-dollar contracts without flinching. Harold greeted me at his office with a tight handshake, his eyes filled with concern. "You did the right thing telling me," he said. "Now let's make sure you stay protected." We went into a private conference room. The blinds were drawn, sunlight filtering through in stripes, giving the room a serious, almost courtroom-like heaviness. Harold went through options, tightening my trust, restructuring estates, adding safeguards Grant could never circumvent. But the most decisive action was something bolder, creating a new, ironclad trust that transferred financial power away from my vulnerable position and into a secure structure only I controlled. "If he tries anything after this," Harold said, "he'll hit a wall so thick he won't even understand what went wrong." Listening to him lit a fire inside me, not anger, clarity. Grant had assumed I would be passive, easy to manipulate. He had forgotten I had shaped an empire with my own hands. Harold printed documents, explained legal strategies, and outlined every loophole we needed to close. I signed each page with a steady hand, my resolve growing stronger with every stroke of ink. When it was over, Harold leaned back. "Eleanor, your son is playing with fire." I looked him in the eyes. "Then he's about to learn I don't burn." Walking out of the office, I felt lighter, not happy, not relieved, but fortified. My steps were firmer, my spine straighter. Boise's midday breeze brushed against my face like a reminder that I had taken control. But a storm was coming, and I knew it. Hours later, as I prepared dinner, my phone buzzed. It was Grant. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice too sweet, too polite. "I'm stopping by tomorrow. Need you to look at some paperwork. Shouldn't take long." The audacity of it nearly made me laugh. He had no idea I now knew everything. No idea I had cut him off before he even began. That night, sleep refused to come. I sat awake in the dim glow of my bedside lamp, rehearsing every possible scenario for tomorrow. He would walk in confident. He would smile. He would present something disguised as helpful. And he would expect me to sign. But he wouldn't expect the woman who would greet him. Not the soft, trusting mother. Not the quiet widow. He would meet the strategist he created, the one who had learned through his betrayal that sometimes love isn't enough to keep a door open. I wasn't preparing to confront him with anger. I was preparing to confront him with truth. And something told me he wouldn't handle it well. Grant arrived the next afternoon exactly as I expected, overconfident, smiling too widely, carrying a folder tucked neatly under his arm. He hugged me with exaggerated warmth, the kind that felt more like performance than affection. "Mom, you look great," he said, eyes scanning the house as if mentally mapping out assets. My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. Years of business taught me that the most powerful person in the room is the one who shows the least. We sat at the dining table. He placed the folder in front of me with a practiced casualness. "So, I found some documents that could really help streamline your estate," he began. "Nothing urgent, just some simple signatures." Simple signatures. The phrase echoed with the same tone he used on the porch, the same manipulative softness. I opened the folder slowly. Inside were pages crafted to look like organizational forms, but the fine print revealed the truth. Full financial transfer authority shifted to him, not upon my death. Now, immediately, he had actually prepared it. He had actually brought it here. The betrayal wasn't theoretical anymore. It was in black ink. I closed the folder gently. "Grant," I said quietly, "why are you doing this?" His eyes flickered, a flash of irritation before he plastered on a smile. "Doing what?" "Mom, I'm trying to help you. You're 70 now. Things get complicated at your age." There it was, the disrespect hidden beneath false concern. I folded my hands, steadying myself. "You've been meeting with someone, a man named Victor Hale." The shift in his expression was immediate. Shock, then defensiveness. "Marissa told you," he muttered, jaw tightening. "I heard enough on my own," I said, "and I know your plans." He leaned back, eyes narrowing. "Mom, you don't understand. I'm your son. This money will come to me anyway. Why not now? Why not let someone manage things who knows the future?" "The future?" I repeated softly. "You mean yours." He slammed a hand on the table. "I deserve it. I'm tired of waiting while you hoard everything." The words cut deeper than any knife, not because of the anger, but because of the entitlement, the belief that my life's work was something he was owed simply for existing. I stood slowly, meeting his eyes for the first time with the full force of the woman he underestimated. "Grant, I already secured everything yesterday, legally, permanently. You cannot access a single cent without my consent." His face drained of color. "What?" "I know what you planned, and I protected myself." He stared at me, fury building like a storm. "You chose her side, Marissa's." "I chose the truth," I said, "and survival." There was a long, suffocating silence. Then he grabbed the folder, shoved his chair back, and stormed out without looking at me. The door slammed so hard the frame rattled. My legs felt weak, but I refused to crumble. Instead, I steadied myself against the table and breathed deeply. It was done. Not the battle. No, but the beginning of the end. The fallout from that confrontation was immediate and brutal. Grant didn't call, didn't text, didn't come by. For 3 days, the house felt hollow, as if the emotional storm had sucked the air from every room. Marissa visited daily, trying to keep me company, but she saw the dullness in my eyes, the heaviness that comes when a mother realizes her love cannot fix what's already broken. On the 4th morning, I received a call I wasn't expecting. It was Victor Hale, the man influencing my son. His voice was smooth and oily. "Mrs. Kingsley," he began, "I think we need to discuss the situation. Grant is upset." "I imagine he is," I said, my tone cold enough to freeze air. He chuckled. "You don't need to make this more difficult. You're 70. Managing wealth at your age is complicated. Grant can handle these responsibilities." The insult was so blatant it almost stunned me. "You don't know me," I said evenly. "Oh, I know enough," he replied. "And if you don't reconsider, Grant might take legal action." That was the moment I understood. This wasn't just Grant's greed. It was manipulation, exploitation. Someone had weaponized my son's weaknesses. I exhaled slowly. "Mr. Hale, let me make something clear. My affairs are legally secured. If you attempt to interfere again, I will pursue action against you for coercion, attempted fraud, and elder manipulation." He didn't laugh this time. He hung up. I sat there for several minutes, staring at my reflection in the microwave's metal door. I looked tired, bone tired, but also resolved. But the emotional blow came later that afternoon when Grant finally showed up. He didn't knock. He walked in, face tense, eyes wild. "You talked to Victor," he said. "Yes," I replied. "You humiliated me." "Grant, he is using you." "No," he snapped. "You're the one using me. You never trusted me." The accusation hit harder than it should have. I swallowed. "I trusted you with everything except my life's work, and now I know why." He stepped closer, voice shaking. "I needed that money. I have plans. I have debts. I have a future. And you wanted me to fund it," I said softly. He froze. The truth hung between us like a blade. His shoulders slumped, but not out of remorse, out of defeat. "I thought you'd help me," he whispered, "the way you always do." I blinked back tears. "Helping you and enabling you are not the same thing." He didn't respond. He just turned around and left. No rage this time, no slammed door, just a quiet exit that somehow hurt more. When the house went silent again, I sat down slowly. The fight wasn't just about money. It was about identity. It was about confronting the painful truth that sometimes the child you raised becomes someone you can no longer recognize. But the next moves would be mine. And I had one final step left. The next day, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I had one last decision to make, one that would determine the future, not just of my wealth, but of my family, my dignity, and my peace. I brewed my morning tea, sat at the table, and stared at the steam rising from the cup as if it could show me the right answer. I knew what had to be done. Before noon, I called Harold and asked him to meet. When we sat down in his office, I took a deep breath. "I want to rewrite my will," I said. Harold nodded, his expression both calm and compassionate. "Are you certain?" "I am." We drafted everything carefully, removing Grant entirely, not out of punishment, but out of necessity. My assets were placed in a trust solely for Marissa, managed under strict legal layers. But the biggest decision was something I hadn't expected: establishing a philanthropic foundation in Daniel's name, with a large portion dedicated to veterans and rural farmers. It felt right. It felt like honoring the life we built. Harold slid the papers toward me. "This protects you fully." I signed. But the hardest part wasn't signing away Grant's inheritance. It was accepting what that meant. A line drawn, a door closing, a future reshaped. That evening, I sat alone on my porch, wrapped in a blanket as the sky turned navy blue. I watched cars pass in the distance, listened to crickets, felt the gentle ache of a mother who had to choose peace over hope, love over attachment, sanity over sentiment. When Marissa arrived to check on me, she saw the fatigue in my eyes. "Mom, what did you do today?" "I secured our future," I whispered. She sat beside me silently. After a long pause, she said, "I know this hurts, but you did what you had to." I nodded. "I wish things were different." "So do I," she replied. "But you can't save someone who refuses to save themselves." We watched the night deepen, the stars emerging one by one. It struck me then. Every triumph in my life had come with sacrifice. This was no different. I had saved my life's work. I had protected myself from a betrayal that could have destroyed me. But saving yourself always costs something. And this time, it cost me the illusion that my son still saw me as his mother. As the porch light flickered above us, I breathed out a slow, steady breath. I had done everything I could. The rest was out of my hands now. Grant had chosen his path, and I had finally, painfully, chosen mine. In the days that followed Grant's explosive departure, the house felt heavier than ever, like the walls themselves had absorbed the conflict and were holding it hostage in the air. Even though the sun still spilled through the kitchen windows every morning, warming the hardwood floors and lighting up the potted herbs Marissa insisted on keeping alive, everything felt dim. I moved through my home like a ghost, brushing my hands along the counters, opening cabinets, standing in rooms without remembering why I entered them. Every part of me felt bruised, as if betrayal had hands and had gripped my ribs until they cracked. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just hollow. The silence was a strange creature. Sometimes it felt comforting, but more often it felt like a punishment I didn't deserve. At night, the loneliness pressed the hardest. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling fan swirling endlessly, remembering my son at 5 years old, how he used to run barefoot through the yard, how he'd ask me questions about the stars, how he'd say, "Mom, when I grow up, I'll take care of you." Those memories now felt like artifacts from another lifetime, a life where things were simpler, where trust was unshakable. I often found myself gripping my pillow just to feel something warm under my fingertips. I wondered if I missed him, or the version of him I once believed in. Marissa checked in on me every day, sometimes bringing groceries, sometimes dropping off fresh soup, sometimes sitting quietly with me on the porch without saying a single word. And though her presence eased the ache a little, even she couldn't reach the deepest part of the wound. Because a mother's heartbreak, especially when it's caused by her own child, is a kind of fracture that doesn't heal clean. It aches in unpredictable waves. One evening, as I stood outside watching the sunset melt into the foothills, I picked up my phone and scrolled through old messages from Grant. Birthdays, holidays, random pictures he'd send from his apartment. And then the more recent messages, cold, transactional, manipulative. My thumb hovered over the keypad as though typing a message might magically fix something, but I locked the phone instead. I wasn't ready. And if I was being honest with myself, I wasn't sure I ever would be. That night I cried, not loudly, not violently, but quietly, like a leak in a pipe that had finally found its way through. Tears slid down into my hair as I whispered the same sentence over and over. Where did I go wrong? But the truth was, I hadn't gone wrong. I had given everything, every ounce of love, every sacrifice, every chance. And sometimes, even that is not enough to save someone from themselves. Still, a tiny part of me hoped. Hoped Grant would wake up. Hoped he would see his mistakes. Hoped he would return not for my money, but for my heart. I didn't know if that hope was a strength or a weakness, but it was the only thing keeping me from collapsing entirely. And in the quiet, in the ache, I realized something important. Sometimes the pain before the plot twist is necessary for the story to shift. Something was coming. I could feel it. I just didn't know whether it would break me further or finally begin to mend what had been shattered. It was 3 days later when the shift finally came, not with a knock at the door, not with a phone call, but with a message from a number I didn't recognize. I was in the kitchen rinsing lettuce when my phone buzzed on the counter. I almost ignored it. I was tired of screens, tired of updates, tired of anything that reminded me of the mess swirling around me. But something nudged me to look. When I picked up the phone, I saw a name I didn't expect. Harper, Grant's girlfriend. We'd spoken only a few times in the past, always politely, always briefly. She was a quiet woman, the kind who observed more than she spoke. The text was short, almost hesitant. "Eleanor, we need to talk. It's about Grant. It's serious." My stomach tightened. A dozen thoughts spiraled through my mind. Was he injured? Arrested? Missing? Dead? Betrayal didn't erase motherhood. Even after everything he'd tried to do, my first instinct was still fear for my child's safety. I typed back quickly, and within minutes, she called. Her voice trembled. "He's not okay," she said. Everything fell apart. And then the story came out, slowly at first, then in a rush. Grant's so-called mentor, the man who promised him shortcuts to wealth, had drained him of everything he had left. His savings, his credit, even the emergency funds he kept tucked away in a separate account. All of it gone. The mentor disappeared, leaving Grant with nothing but debt collectors and humiliation. Harper explained how Grant had been spiraling for days, angry, confused, blaming everyone but himself, until reality finally pinned him down. "He's scared, Eleanor," she whispered. "He won't admit it, but he's scared, and he doesn't know what to do." I sank into a chair, the world tilting for a moment. I should have felt vindicated, relief, justice. After all, this was the consequence of his own choices. But instead, a wave of grief crashed over me. My son wasn't just lost. He was drowning. And even though he had tried to take everything from me, even though he'd broken my trust so deeply, he was still my boy. "Does he want to see me?" I asked quietly. There was a long pause. "He's ashamed," she said. "He thinks you'll never forgive him." I closed my eyes, pressing my fingers into my forehead. Forgiveness wasn't the question. Not yet. But seeing him, hearing him, understanding the damage inside him, that I could do. But Harper added something else, something that struck me deeply. "Eleanor, he keeps saying he doesn't deserve to be your son." That sentence carved a hole straight through me, because despite everything, despite the betrayal and manipulation and lies, Grant was still a part of me. And no matter how far he'd fallen, no matter how wrong he'd been, a mother never stops seeing the child she once held. Harper asked if she could bring him over sometime soon. I didn't answer right away. I needed the night to breathe, to process, to steel myself. Because I knew that seeing him again wasn't just a meeting, it would be a reckoning. For him, for me, for all the wounds between us. And as I hung up the phone, I realized something. Sometimes life doesn't give you clean endings or simple answers. Sometimes it gives you broken pieces and asks you to decide what you'll do with them. When Marissa arrived the next morning, the worry on her face was immediate. She set down a bag of groceries, glanced at me, and said, "Mom, you look pale. What happened?" I told her everything. Harper's call, Grant's collapse, the scam, the debt, the shame. Marissa listened without interrupting, her jaw tightening with every detail. She'd always been the more grounded one of my children, but she wasn't emotionless. She loved her brother, even when she didn't approve of him. When I finished, she exhaled slowly and leaned against the counter. "Mom, are you okay?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure it was true. She stepped closer, resting a hand on my shoulder. "You don't have to fix him. Not again." Her words hit me hard, because she was right. I had spent decades patching Grant's mistakes, smoothing his bad decisions, cushioning his falls. Maybe that was part of the problem. Maybe I had loved him so fiercely that he never learned to stand on solid ground. But motherhood doesn't come with clean lessons. You do the best you can with the heart you have, and sometimes your best creates cracks you never meant to form. Marissa spent the day with me. We rearranged the pantry, watered the garden, cleaned out the junk drawer. She talked about work, about a new project she was leading, about her plans to adopt a rescue dog. She tried to keep things light, but I could feel her watching me, checking for signs of emotional collapse. Every so often, she would squeeze my hand or rest her head briefly on my shoulder. It was her way of anchoring me, keeping me from drifting too far into worry. That evening, as we prepared dinner together, she spoke softly. "Mom, Whatever happens, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Those words warmed me more than any meal could. Loyalty is a rare kind of love, the quiet, steady kind that doesn't waver when storms hit. Later that night, after Marissa left, I walked through the house, touching the little things she'd straightened, the stack of mail, the blanket folded over the couch, the lemon verbena candle she lit in the kitchen. Her presence lingered in every corner, reminding me that even in the middle of heartbreak, I wasn't alone. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat at the dining table, the same place where Grant had once thrown accusations like knives. The room felt different now, softer, balanced, a space reclaimed by the daughter who had stayed, who had chosen love without conditions. As I sipped my tea, I realized something vital. It wasn't that Grant's betrayal had destroyed me. It was that Marissa's loyalty had kept me standing. And that understanding, it shifted something in my chest. It didn't erase the pain. It didn't solve the problem. But it reminded me that not all family chapters are tragic. Some are healing. Some are golden. Some save you without even meaning to. 2 days later, I heard a knock. Not urgent, not aggressive, but gentle, as if the person on the other side wasn't sure they deserved to stand there. I opened the door and froze. Grant stood on the porch, wearing the same hoodie he used to mow the lawn in as a teenager, his face pale, his eyes swollen and exhausted. He looked like a man who'd been stripped of every layer of arrogance he once wore like armor. "Hi, Mom," he whispered. His voice cracked on the last word, and something inside me trembled. I took a step back, motioning him in. He moved slowly, like someone walking through a memory they weren't sure they were allowed to touch. We sat at the kitchen table. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he exhaled shakily. "I messed up," he said. "No, actually, I ruined everything." I didn't respond. I wanted him to keep going, not the polished excuses, not the rehearsed speeches, but the truth. He swallowed hard. I thought I deserved your money." My chest tightened, but I stayed silent. He continued, his voice raw. "I told myself I was helping, that you didn't need it, that I'd make it grow. But really, I wanted the shortcut. I wanted the life without the work. I wanted to feel important." He wiped his face angrily. "And now look at me." Tears rolled down his cheeks. Real tears, not manipulative ones. For the first time in years, he wasn't performing. He was collapsing. Then he said the sentence that nearly broke me. "I didn't think I was enough unless I had money. I thought you'd be proud of me if I looked successful." My heart twisted. The boy who once brought me dandelions from the yard now believed he needed millions to be worthy of love. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Not just for the money, for everything, for the disrespect, for the lies, for trying to steal what you earned. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even deserve it." He looked down at his hands. "But I wanted you to know I'm done chasing shortcuts. I want to start over." The silence between us felt thick, heavy, honest. And for the first time in a long time, I saw the child beneath the mistakes, the boy I raised, not the man he had become. I reached across the table, placing my hand gently over his. He flinched at first, then melted into the touch like he'd been waiting years for it. "You're enough," I whispered. "You always were. But love doesn't erase consequences." He nodded slowly, tears dripping onto the table. "I know," he said, "and I accept that." In that moment, we weren't healed. We weren't fixed. But the door to healing had opened, just a crack, enough for both of us to breathe again. After Grant left that evening, I stayed at the table for a long time, staring at the chair he had sat in. A strange calm settled over me, not joy, not relief, but a quiet acceptance. Pain had been living inside me for weeks, and now it was finally loosening its grip. He hadn't come to reclaim money. He hadn't come to manipulate. He came to apologize, to break open, to admit the truth, to take responsibility. And that mattered. The next morning, I called my attorney just to make sure everything was still secure. The trust remained untouched, protected behind every safeguard I had put in place. Grant's apology didn't change the structure or the boundaries I built to protect myself. Love is one thing, legal security is another, and both matter. Later in the afternoon, Marissa came over again with lunch. We sat in the living room, and I told her everything about Grant's visit. Every word, every tear, every moment where he let himself be vulnerable. She listened quietly, her eyes softening as she processed it. She didn't defend him, but she didn't judge him harshly either. She simply said, "People don't change until life hits them in a way they can't ignore." She was right. Pain had finally cracked open the shell Grant had built around himself, and from that crack, something human was emerging. That evening, I decided I needed fresh air. I stepped outside and walked slowly down the edge of my property, the setting sun softening the sky into shades of apricot and rose. The breeze carried the scent of pine and soil, reminders of the land I had built my business upon. I felt grounded, present, whole. As I walked, I realized something important. This wasn't the ending of a tragedy. It was the beginning of a boundary. Grant had been humbled. I had been strengthened. Marissa had been revealed as the anchor I always relied on without fully appreciating. And above all, I had reclaimed my life, not just my money. Later that night, Grant sent one more message. "Thank you for listening, Mom. I'm going to make things right, with or without money. I love you." I replied simply, "I love you too. Keep going." Because forgiveness isn't a door you throw open. It's a door you unlock slowly, over time, as trust rebuilds ounce by ounce. I didn't give him access to the trust. I didn't change my will. I didn't undo a single protective measure. And that wasn't cruelty. It was growth. Boundaries don't mean lack of love. They mean choosing self-respect over blind vulnerability. Standing in my quiet living room, the house finally felt peaceful again. Not perfect, not healed, but peaceful. And sometimes, peace is the best possible ending. As I turned off the lights and headed to bed, one truth echoed through my mind. A truth I wish I had learned decades earlier.